evening. I have the privilege tonight of introducing Father John Summers, who will deliver a lecture on the St. John of Damascus Orthodox Educational Initiative, of which he is the headmaster. Father John has a BA in Philosophy and History from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, an MA in Researching, and a Certificate of Advanced Graduate Studies in History, Literature, and Philosophy, both from Our Lady of the Elms College in Chicopee, Massachusetts, and an MA in Philosophy from the Holy Apostles College in Cromwell, Connecticut. He has taught over the years at several high schools in various parts of the country and has also served as an adjunct professor of history, specializing in modern European history at Newbury College in Brookline, Massachusetts. Father John, who is married with 8 children, is the serving priest of the St. John of Damascus Orthodox Church in Hillsdale, Michigan, which also serves as the chapel for the initiative. Father John founded the St. John of Damascus Orthodox Educational Initiative, which is under the auspices of the Eparchial Synod of the Church of the Genuine Orthodox Christians of America and under the hierarchical oversight of His Eminence Metropolitan Moses of Toronto in the fall of 2019. The initiative, an online program of instruction based on the tradition of classical education embodied in the medieval trivium, that is grammar, logic, and rhetoric, currently has an enrollment of 60 students ranging in age from 9 to 18. The St. Photius Orthodox Theological Seminary is honored to support and collaborate with the St. John of Damascus Educational Initiative. We understand the critical need for our programs in view of the budgetary, administrative, and curricular problems at play in the public school system. Even more importantly, St. Photius and St. John share the vision that the conveyance of a quality Christian education is one of the greatest services we can offer our youth. When we fulfill that duty, we show proper love and gratitude to our Savior for His having committed this sacred trust to us. And He, in turn, offers His continuing mercy and grace for the preservation of the Church and the salvation of our souls. Please welcome Father John and open your hearts to His God-pleasing and essential ministry.
On behalf of our hierarchical overseer, Metropolitan Moses, I'd like to begin by thanking His Eminence Bishop Auxentios, Father Patapius, Father Gregory, and faculty and staff of the St. Photius Orthodox Theological Seminary, as well as the Brotherhood of the Monastery, who has so graciously given me hospitality for another edifying visit. I am here today to talk to you as a concerned father of 8 children. I am here today as a concerned priest of our church. I am here today as a concerned school teacher who, having worked in public schools, sees a storm overhead and the children of our church in the midst of it. Yet I am also here because I have great hope and am greatly encouraged by the blessings God has given us in having the St. Photius Orthodox Theological School and the St. John of Damascus Orthodox Educational Initiative. Now, people often ask me why we have St. John's Initiative. They say, aren't the public schools good enough? And yet one does not have to go very far to see that there are significant issues with the educational system, whether public or private. To address such questions, I would like to begin with the following. We need to recognize that there is no such thing as an ideologically neutral education. Just as with academic work generally, there are always underlying assumptions that drive the education of children. Pardon me. In the Psalms, David says, "Goodness and knowledge and discipline teach thou me." If we wish to give our students an education based on orthodoxy, we must ponder the meaning of this verse. Orthodoxy must be the ideology, must be the worldview, must be the mindset upon which we build our approach to education. In seeking to prepare Orthodox youth that will be able to encounter the secular anti-Christian world in which we live, we must endeavor to truly teach them how to live this verse. And of course that means that as adults, we have to learn how to live by this verse. We must truly educate them. And here we must ask, what is the purpose of education? And I would humbly submit 2 answers to this question. It's a bit difficult because, of course, you could have a whole talk just on that alone. First, the purpose of education is to endow students with the skills, the habits, and the knowledge necessary so that they may read, speak, and write effectively. As in ethics, we seek to teach those things that will help children to find their final end, their purpose in life, to fulfill their purpose in life. Now, second, and this second answer is directed at that end. The purpose of education, that is, the purpose of Orthodox education, as with life, is to attain theosis, to become sons and daughters of God by adoption. And that means to endow students with the sort of tools that they need, spiritual and natural, to avoid and to conquer the various enemies that they encounter and claims that they encounter in life. Now, the problem is that mainstream approaches to education undermine either one or both of these stated purposes of education. And I should preface this by saying, I worked in the public school system for a number of years. There are a lot of good people in the public school system. This is not, I by no means mean to castigate any individual in the public school system or in the approach to education, but their individual approach to education. But there is a trajectory that we observe. We're all adults here, so let's be clear. When we look at the curriculum and instruction of most public and private schools, we see a morass of anti-Christian, anti-human rhetoric. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm sorry. I had a migraine earlier, and I obviously put two sentences in a row here. We see a morass of anti-Christian and anti-human rhetoric. And to this end, let me give you just two examples. There's a great many examples, of course, that one could find, but I'd like to just offer up two. When I was a public school teacher, I would often notice that students around 15 or 16 years of age could go on at length about the class struggle, about the haves and the have-nots. In a word, they would be able to spout Marxist ideology freely. And don't get nervous, I'm not about to make any political comments here. But I am thinking about Marxism in this instance as a spiritual phenomenon, an anti-Christian spiritual phenomenon. And yet, these students were clearly not sitting around reading Marx and Engels at night. The reason they were able to speak in this way was because of what they would encounter in their classes, especially in history and English classes. Whether the students be reading a particular novel in their English class or studying a particular time period in history, the pattern was clear. They were to look for a group of oppressors and a group of people who are or were oppressed. In short, they had been habituated to see things in terms of the bourgeoisie and proletariat, and Christianity was almost always put in the position of the bourgeoisie, the privileged class oppressing others. The second example is much more widely felt. Many of our schools now feel legally and morally obligated to preach a specific kind of tolerance, a tolerance that promotes the gay and transgender lifestyle. Now, I've had members of our church ask me, Father John, why is it a problem if the school teaches my son that it is okay to be gay or transgender? That won't make him gay. Now, let's assume for the sake of argument that that's true. But the crux of the problem is this, and we need to let this really sink in. If we allow Orthodox Christian children to learn that it is all right to be homosexual, that it is not an immoral, unnatural lifestyle, they will likely see a very destructive corollary. If it is okay to be homosexual, then the church has been wrong for 2,000 years. And if the church is wrong about so basic an issue, she cannot be right about anything. This, unfortunately, inculcates our children, our youth, with a certain cynicism about the authority of the church. Now, I don't want you to think that this is all about doom and gloom. But we must look the problem in the face if we are to have the clarity and the fortitude to do something about it. If we don't recognize the depth of the problem, we won't push ourselves to come together as a church to address these issues. We cannot despair. We need to find meaningful, daring solutions. And when I say daring, I do not mean daring after the manner of the world. I mean the sort of daring that St. Paul talks about in Hebrews 11. And if you will permit me, I would like to read a section from that very chapter, especially for the benefit of the students here at the seminary. St. Paul writes, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good report. Through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed. And he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph, and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, and of Barak, and of Samson and Jephthah, of David also and Samuel, and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might attain a better resurrection. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect." Now you might say, "Father John, that is a beautiful passage, but how does it relate to the vision of St. John of Damascus?" And here let me say this, in short, we cannot give up. We have to have a godly courage. I've seen a great many efforts in the time that I've served the church fall apart. And often it's because we don't push ourselves hard enough. And so, but it's also because we don't put our trust in God. And so this has to be foundational in a practical sense. There's no division here between this sort of godly fortitude born of faith that St. Paul talks about in Hebrews and the practical work of what we're doing, whether in the initiative or in spots. We must put all our trust in God that there is a way forward, just as the saints in every generation have done and vanquished their enemies. Now, we need a means by which Orthodox children may defend themselves from the manifold attacks on our faith. And when I say a means here, I mean practical tools, intellectual tools. Thankfully, we do not have to, as it were, reinvent the wheel here. The fathers of the church already had a method of education to do this, and that method is the classical method of education. In the ancient and medieval world, education came to be structured around the liberal arts. In ancient Greece and Rome, they understood this very often in political terms. The liberal arts, were the education of a free citizen. Now, I would submit that beginning at least with the Greek apologists, the fathers of the church took this and transformed it in a crucial and fundamental way. They took the liberal arts, which had previously been understood primarily in a political way, especially in Rome, and made them the education of the rational sheep of Christ. That is to say, we need to have a way to make use of this liberty, not political liberty, but spiritual liberty, that is precisely what it means to be created in the image of God. The choice between truth and falsehood, life and death, is before us all the time. Recall St. Paul. whether an angel from heaven, whether I or an angel from heaven proclaim to any other gospel to you, let him be anathema. We read in the Didache, the teaching of the apostles to the nations, there are two ways, the way of life and the way of death, and there is a great difference between these two ways. So we have to, as our children are beset on every side by these manifold claims, these attacks on the faith, we have to train them to be able to analyze them, to detect the error in them, and then respond in such a fashion that is in accordance with orthodoxy. In the hands of the fathers, the liberal arts then were important tools for the detection of error, for the defense of the faith, and to instruct the faithful. And at the initiative, we have adopted and continue to work on implementing this approach in the curriculum and classes that we offer. Now, for the purposes of this talk, I would like to speak about three of the liberal arts. I would say that these are the three most fundamental liberal arts. They're often referred to together as the trivium, and they are grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Now, despite the fact that grammar is first, I would like to start from rhetoric and work my way backwards. And when we think of rhetoric, we need to think about the art of persuasion, right? And this is the reason I want to work backwards from this is because, put yourself, many of you were in school not too long ago. I mean, in public school, say, right? A given claim is put in front of you, right? The person is trying to convince you of something by this claim. Rhetoric endows the person not only with the ability to convince someone else, but to understand the argument and the structure of it, the various proofs that the person is employing to convince you. And having analyzed it and looked at the different parts of it, you can say, well, this part's good. We should keep these parts because we don't want to be contrarians, right? We don't want to be instinctual, knee-jerk contrarians as Orthodox Christians. We want to be discerning continually to look where is good and where is evil. What can we keep and use for the benefit of the church, and what do we leave aside, right? So we don't want to be contrarians that just have a knee-jerk approach, and the art of rhetoric gives us the ability to analyze those arguments, to separate out the different proofs that the person employed, and the different kinds of evidence, and then to say what parts we should agree with, if any, and which parts we should disagree with, and then to be able to say why. And this, now if we said first that rhetoric was the art of persuasion, it's worthwhile to look at or to consider Aristotle's lengthier definition of the art of rhetoric, which he says, rhetoric is the ability to find the available means of persuasion in any given circumstance. That's the sort of versatility that we need to give Orthodox students, because we can't know every claim that they're going to encounter or every argument ahead of time. I often like to say about classical education to equate it with the saying, right? You give a man a fish, he eats for a day. You teach him how to fish, he eats for a lifetime. This is the idea. This is the utility of this versatility that the art of rhetoric, especially when taught in the Aristotelian fashion, gives us. Now, Aristotle also observes at the very beginning of Book 1 of the Rhetoric that the counterpart of rhetoric is dialectic or logic. And indeed, in order to carry out successful persuasion, we must be able to use logic well, to think clearly, to reason clearly. The evidence, any piece of evidence doesn't just present itself and say, here I am and this is what I mean. Every piece of evidence in any inquiry, whether in history or in science, in theology or in philosophy, and the list goes on, requires interpretation and reasoning to be employed to make sense of it. And so, now you might say, well, again, let's bring this back to the initiative. See, in my mind, I'm thinking of the initiative, but you might think I'm just tangentially thinking about Aristotle because I like him, right? So what we're trying to do day by day in the initiative is teach students how to employ these skills. Right? You start logic. If a student starts at the proper age, you know, we have students right now from age 9 to 18. Actually, we have one 19-year-old. Don't get worried, we're preparing her for spots. If they start at 9, they start with our classical composition program, which is based on the progymnasmata, which is a time-honored method of teaching composition, both in the classical period and in Byzantium. And at the age of 12, they begin logic, right? They begin to learn how to reason. We have 2 logic classes, Logic 1 and Logic 2. But having taken those 2 classes, it's not like they just take logic and never talk about it again. In all of the other classes, and certainly in my other classes, we are consistently making connections about how to utilize logic in various disciplines, especially in history and literature. Because for the average student, these, as I said earlier, these are the 2 biggest problem areas, right? What they encounter in the history classroom and what they encounter in the literature classroom. And then at about the age of 15 or 16, we move them from the classical composition curriculum into the rhetoric curriculum, which is based on selections from Aristotle's text. So we have a lot of work to do. And I must say, and I'll admit at the outset, this is all very ambitious, right? Very few people, unfortunately, our society long since abandoned this approach to education, at least for distributed over a large number of people. We haven't done this regularly for a long time. But again, this comes back to the question of the need for fortitude, right? And the need for godly courage and faith, about asking God for assistance in how to carry out this curriculum. Now, tangibly, going further, the other question I often get is, now, Father, is it only an online program, right? Is the initiative, I mean. Are we only going to offer classes online? And the answer to that is no. The purpose, the intention of the initiative is to establish hybrid programs in as many parishes in our eparchy would like to have hybrid school programs. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. As it happens, I've traveled a lot throughout the eparchy to serve in different parishes. For about 3 or 4 years, I was have Kamalafka will travel, right? Priest. So I was going to all over the eparchy, and I got to meet a lot of different people and so forth. And I encountered a very consistent pattern where people would say, I don't like what's going on in the public schools. I'm completely intimidated by the prospect of homeschooling. We would like to have a parish school, but we don't know how to carry it out. So what we would like to do in the initiative is try to help that happen. Not necessarily parish schools, but parish school programs. So let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you had a given parish, and in that parish there was one person who could teach English and one person who could teach history or middle school science, but there was big gaps in the other areas. The initiative would come meet with the people that were in that parish that were interested in carrying or starting such a program, and then create a pattern for them to follow, a rate that's doable. Not, a lot of times people try to go from 0 to 60, so they're all at once. They're going from nothing to they want to have 5 days a week, right, and 8 hours a day, and that's just not reasonable, right? So we would like to try to help them have manageable goals, and for those things that they cannot deliver instruction in, they then they have a screen, such as what you have here, and we have classes offered by the initiative that the students that are there then watch and participate in, right? The reason that we ended up sticking with the online program, or just the online program so much, is because of the COVID shutdown, right? Now we are moving forward with this, and as His Eminence or Father Gregory said, I honestly can't remember which, I'm sorry, we are presently at 60 students in the online program for the initiative. Most of them are in our eparchy, although we have students as far away as Serbia and the United Kingdom who are also in our church. And we have 21 members, I think, of our adult discussion groups, which is really an attempt to provide adult education, not like you do here at Spots, but basically Sunday school for adults, which often doesn't happen, right, in a parish. You know, oftentimes the parish doesn't have that for the adults. So we read various texts and talk about them in that context. We really need help, and we are inspired. I am inspired greatly by what I have seen at Spots since I've been visiting here since the summer and been participating in the auditing your classes. And to illustrate this, or to explain this, let's go back to what David said. Goodness and knowledge and discipline teach thou me. So the classical method of education is important, it's useful, it gives us tools that will help our students. But by itself, it's not going to do the job, right? A hammer doesn't build a house on its own, right? You need other pieces. People have asked me, will you hire people who say are not Orthodox? And I tend to say no. I haven't hired anyone who's not Orthodox. Why? Because I believe, and we believe at the initiative, Metropolitan Moses believes very strongly, that if we're to bequeath a proper understanding of education to the students, then the person has to be striving to understand how orthodoxy relates to education, firstly, and into life generally. And so that means that that person ideally has gone through some sort of formation, both educationally and as a way of life, that has shown them how it's foundational for life to participate in services regularly, right? Not just on Sundays, but on feast days, right? To say prayers at home, to fast, and why we fast, why we do these things. And so the students here at Spots are ideal candidates to help us. They're ideal candidates to be brought on as teachers, and in other capacities to help the St. John of Damascus Orthodox Educational Initiative. Frequently, I said this to His Eminence yesterday, and everyone we were at dinner at the convent. Frequently, and I'm sure here at Spots you can relate to this. This type of work is so immense that you realize any one person can't do it. But this should be a source of edification for us. That when we're put in that position, we realize that we have to work together as the body of Christ, in order to carry these things out. That's why no one person can do it. That's why not even 5 good people can do it. We need to get as many people as possible working together to have a cohesive vision, both at the primary and secondary levels on the one hand, and on the post-secondary level here at Spots on the other hand, in order to carry out this great work. I feel as though I've said a lot, and I'd really like to hear your thoughts. You can ask me just about anything you'd like about what we talked about. Questions? There have to be questions or comments. You knew I was going to call on you anyway, didn't you, Vasily? Okay, good. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, that's the rule. See, he's been in my discussion because he knows the rule. You can't not say anything. All right, go ahead, Vasily.
Okay. You were talking about logic at one point, and I guess there's just one part that seems a little incomplete.
Okay.
As far as theology is concerned, we can't really comprehend it logically. At least that's what I understand. So
Sure.
What use does it have in relation to orthodoxy? You know, it's supposed to confound the wise.
Right.
So logic is pretty, supposed to be wise.
Right.
So could you speak more to that?
Sure, yeah. Thank you so much for asking that. So,
Maybe you want to repeat it, Father.
oh, I forgot. Thank you. So, I'll
Say it better than me, yeah.
I'll say it, and then you'll correct me if I didn't say it correctly. So what he asked was, I spoke about the importance of logic, but we learned that Orthodox theology is not supposed to be speculative or founded upon logic. So what use is it to an Orthodox Christian? Is that not what you asked? Yeah, okay. So I think we have to state here at the outset that we have two types of knowledge, natural and spiritual. And we touch upon this regularly in the initiative classes, especially with the high school students. So on the side of natural wisdom, right, we have this, we make use of logic and evidence, and no one denies this, right? It's always funny when people argue against the use of logic and use logic to argue that logic is bad. Didn't you just use modus ponens? But at the same time, we maintain very strongly, right, that logic and reasoning will not get us to theological or spiritual wisdom. And I must say that I think that if an Orthodox Christian studies logic and some philosophy, as you probably have seen in your own classes here, it simultaneously helps to order your mind and to train you to think clearly and to reason where you can employ reason. And if you're being sober, you can see reason stops at a certain point. But you don't really truly understand that unless you make a study of both sorts of wisdom. Does that make sense to you? We try to do that in a small level, a small way, I should say, or a lower level in the initiative with the students, by reinforcing that in different ways. And then, of course, if students continue on at spots, based on the conversations I've had with Father Protapius and the other fathers here, I'm sure that distinction would be maintained strongly and at a much deeper level. Does that answer your question, Vasily?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Yes, Tatiana?
Do you guys plan to accept students younger than 9 as an elementary program in the future?
So the question is, do we plan to accept students younger than 9 in the future? So when we started the initiative, I started with older students, which is actually backwards. Usually when people start private school programs, they start with younger students and work forward. But the reason that we did that is I was concerned about the classroom management issues posed by online instruction. Let's say you have a student is sitting in this desk, 12 years old, right? It's actually happened with your cousin. And they're fidgeting, right? They're not being bad, they're just fidgeting. If you're physically in the classroom, you walk up and you kind of go like this, and if they stop, right? You can't quite do that on Zoom. You'll run into the screen, right? So when we started the initiative, I said, well, we have to start with nothing younger than middle school. We've been conservatively adding classes at earlier ages. I would like to add classes for kids younger than 9, but I'm doing so cautiously, so that we produce a good outcome by doing that. Yeah. So and also I should also say that I'm hoping that these hybrid programs, I've gotten some favorable responses from various parishes about the hybrid programs, or the idea of the hybrid program. So I'm hoping that some of the younger instruction will also be taken care of that way, because then the in-person instruction can happen, and it's more effective. I mean, the online instruction is good, but nothing beats in-person instruction. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Other questions or comments? Yes, Jeffrey.
I don't know much about the trivium, but what do you think is the role of critical thinking and critical reading? Does it incorporate with that, or?
Oh, absolutely.
Because today, I feel like that's a super important skill, at least especially for younger kids.
Right.
As they browse the internet and stuff.
Right.
It's the age of information, but it's the age of misinformation, and there's just tons of traps where people can just get caught up in things or just get misled.
Right.
Even just basic things about how the world works, about food, nutrition, about stuff like that, politics.
Yeah.
Others,
Yeah. So his wait, I'm sorry. Wait, I got to remember his question. Okay. His question was the right. In what way does critical thinking work into the logic rhetoric curriculum? That was your question. So it's interesting, from about the early 1970s, if memory serves, if you look at the educational literature, people started talking about critical thinking because logic had been excised from the curriculum, right? And then they started saying, we have to find ways to teach critical thinking. But again, that's reinventing the wheel. That's precisely the use of logic, is to make sense of information, to analyze information, to try to distinguish between what's true and what's false. You look at the body in the Aristotelian corpus. If you look at the works on logic, as collectively they're called the organon, right? The tool or the instrument. In both, firstly in the logic classes, but also in the rhetoric classes, we're trying to teach children how precise to do that very thing, to think critically, but with meaning. We actually mean something by it. A lot of the literature is very vague about it, in the educational literature, I mean. So, if one of the things we try to emphasize is not simply memorizing answers, but teaching students how to come up with proper questions. If a student doesn't understand how to ask the correct question, or anybody, a human being, they're not going to get to the right answer, right? So the development of a question and learning how to develop questions, well, what should we ask here, is exceptionally important, and it's immediately important to the sort of phenomenon we have on the internet with this barrage of information, real or imagined, right, about everything under the sun, right? Does that make sense, Jeff?
Yeah.
No. Very good. Other thoughts or comments? Yes, Xenia, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you measure the progress of a student to make sure that they have really absorbed what the classes have taught them and successfully? And also, is there any, I'm not exactly sure how to say this, is there any way that you see the program being able to help maybe young Orthodox children who are developing, who may have not had that much exposure to the secular world around them, which is good for many reasons, but also difficult as you get older and you have to inevitably encounter secular environments and culture, and so that they don't get so much of like a shock, you know, or
Hold on one second. So it sounds like you have a very important question, but you had asked me two, and I won't remember to repeat the first one.
yes. The first
So let's do the first one, and then we'll do the second one. I'm happy to do both of them.
Okay.
So we'll say what was the first question again?
The first question is like, how do you measure the progress?
Ah, right. Okay, so the question is, how do we measure the progress of the students? Well, of course, we use a standard grading system. That's the first thing. We do a combination of formal and informal assessment. By formal assessment, I mean what you usually think of: tests, quizzes, essays. We have a lot of extemporary writing assignments, a lot of them. Almost sometimes on a daily basis, we'll give the students a prompt. Some of them kind of hate it, but they get used to it. And actually, I got a wonderful letter from one of them in the middle of the summer that really thanked me for making them do it. But so we give them a prompt, and I'll say, you have 8 minutes, answer the prompt in about 2 paragraphs, and just try to force them to get that out. They'll type it on the forum, so I can go back and check on it later. And then we'll discuss. I'll ask them to defend their position in class. Our classes are limited to 10. Obviously, we can give much more attention to the students informally and recall what they've said in class. In most public schools, you have 125 to 150 students a day, which negatively impacts the kind of assessment you do, right? If you, I know this from painful experience, if you assign essays, for example, when you have 150 students, you're up to 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning grading. So we give the standard sorts of essays and short answer questions and quizzes and tests, combined with oral assessment, it combines very nicely to allow them to give different ways to show what they know. Does that answer your first question?
Yeah, I guess what I meant was, what do you do if you notice a student is struggling to understand the assignment, or is there like one-on-one, or like is there?
Oh, yes.
Actually,
No. So
Yeah.
the follow-up question is, what do we do if we notice a student is struggling?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is we offer them extra help. So our classes meet, generally speaking, 3 days a week. Some of them meet 2 days a week. And then in the ones that have 2 days a week, they also do other instructional videos and so forth. But then if we notice that a student is struggling, we call up the parent and make an appointment and sit down and help them one-on-one on Zoom. So there's a lot of personal attention that we seek to give the students. And we really, all the teachers, we all really enjoy that. Everybody that works for the initiative is very committed to what we're doing. So they see it as in a vocational way, properly understood as a call, as a asceticism. And so we all seek to give the students extra help when they need it on an individual basis. And now, what was your other question? Was
my second question was that, I guess, what I mean is that it's like, of course, every Orthodox person's dream to have like an Orthodox education.
mm-hmm.
But how do you think that would prepare them to, when they get older, to encounter secular culture, to not have such a shock to it, or to be able to grapple, to basically know how to like stay afloat, or
not have
understand
shock, but not be
that
shocked by
there's
what they see.
differences, and to
Mhm.
be tolerable and understanding of others' differences, or what maybe considered, which are considered sins to us, but there's no like conception of that sort of like certain behavior being sinful at all.
Right.
Secular culture, and then
Right.
that conflict of them perceiving us to.
Right. So the question is, and correct me if I'm not understanding your question correctly. The question is effectively, I think, if we shelter them to such a degree that they don't encounter the outside world or disagreement, then how will they be able to deal with the outside world or disagreement about the faith in a psychological way, I think you're saying, when they encounter it. Is that correct, Xenia? What you're saying, is that more or less what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, well, let's start there and we'll see what that produces. So the answer to that is, first, when we're doing our rhetorical exercises, we deliberately have debates in class. Well, they inevitably develop because we use a lot of Socratic discussion. Very frequently, forgive the term, I'll play devil's advocate and argue the other position, and the student will have to respond. But one of the things I emphasize to the students is that they have to be able to disagree respectfully. Right? So, and I think that I actually believe that if they're taught to make arguments in the logical sense and to look at things in this fashion, they're more likely to be able to disagree respectfully, because frequently when people jump all over each other in a disagreement, it's because they have a sense of what they feel threatened, but they don't know how to express it, and then they get stymied and they go after the person, right? So that's one piece. The other piece, I have to stress this, and we unfortunately at the initiative can't really provide this, but the parents who have their children in alternative education have to endeavor to take them to things in which they will encounter people who are not Orthodox, who let's say sports, right? Something where they encounter other kids, and they have to treat those children with respect and love. They're taught to, as the fathers say, love the sinner and hate the sin, right? Love the heretic and hate the heresy, and that they are able to get along with others. We can't provide that because of the restrictions. Just the limitations of what we're doing. But we strongly encourage that parents do that. This is not about. We don't want to have families that are, inside poking out the blinds, afraid of everything, right? So, does that answer your question, Xenia?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yes, Theodora.
What classes are currently offered at the initiative?
for children, you mean, yes?
Yeah.
We're presently offering.
The question?
Oh, thank you. She asked what classes are presently offered at the initiative. So, and the answer to that is we're offering 3 different levels of classical composition: Logic 1, Logic 2, History for the Orthodox Christian 1. This will sound funny at first, but I'll explain it. A combined botany art class, modern, and that's a pilot class. I'll explain that a little more in a moment. A modern Greek class for young children about 7 to 9 years of age. It's another pilot. Middle school literature, high school literature, and I think that is all at the moment. We're seeking to add more classes always, but we try to do things in a manageable way. With respect to the pilot classes, when we want to introduce a new class, we'll contact a certain number of students to participate effectively in an experiment and run a class on the basis that the parents understand that this is being tested out. And that's what we're doing with the botany art class and the modern Greek class at present. Those classes are going very, very, very well. So I think by next semester they'll be advertised on the website. Now, if anybody is looking at the website, and we're putting this on the video, the website has significant issues. So if we have anybody that's willing to volunteer to help us with our website, please step forward. So does that answer your question? I'd actually like to talk a little bit about that botany art class because it reflects something about how we look to teach. The woman who teaches that class, Nicole Finney, has a double major in ecology and philosophy with a master's degree in art education. And one of the things what we're trying to do with the students, especially the young students when we're teaching them science, is we want to get them to observe, right? And we want to inspire a sense of wonder and awe at God's creation, right? So we were thinking actively about how to bring that to pass, and I thought when I was reflecting on what I've seen in terms of pedagogy in science classrooms, I thought, well, it's very much like what you see as standard STEM approach, right? What we've done is they're learning the science of botany and learning how to draw the trees and plants with the intention to get them to really look, because that's why everyone should learn how to draw, right? Not because everyone's going to be an artist, but because drawing makes you look, and so that's very important. The students are really enjoying that. Let me know if do you think whatever you
Going well.
Yeah, we're doing great.
Okay.
Let's keep going with questions. if you
Sure.
don't mind.
I'm happy to do more questions if you'd like. Go ahead, Gabrielle.
Well, I wanted, after you mentioned Nicole and her credentials, I kind of wanted to
Oh,
get a
sorry.
better understanding of what your standards are for your instructors.
Thank you for asking that. So we have I would say, somewhat strict standards for hiring instructors. So first of all, obviously we don't, I think it's obvious, we don't hire anyone that doesn't have a bachelor's degree to teach. We do sometimes take on people to help proctor exams or things like that who do not presently have a bachelor's degree, but in terms of being in an instructional role, they have to have a bachelor's degree, and they have to have at least 18 credits, college credits, in the area in which they teach. In some states, this is called the highly qualified rule. This is not always observed in private schools. Frequently in private schools, because you have a problem with finding teachers, you have someone who's an English teacher and they're like, this semester you're teaching science, FYI. And the last time the person took science was their senior year of high school, right? Or other than the time they were struggling with Krebs cycle in their freshman year or something. So yeah, we're not looking to be accredited because we can't absorb the requirements of that process, but to offset that and to ensure people that we're offering a quality instruction, we have these standards. And I do obviously look also for teaching experience. You can have a bachelor's degree, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can teach. and it doesn't necessarily mean you can teach young children, right? So, does that make sense, Gabrielle? Another question?
I have
Okay.
a follow-up question about not being accredited and what that means in terms of graduation and a student coming out of the initiative, what their sort of, what their credentials look like to
Right.
college.
Right,
They're
right.
Applying for college afterward.
So the question is, since we're not accredited, if a student comes out of the initiative, what would their credentials look like to a college? So what we're moving to do is to make our baseline the preparation for the GED. Oftentimes when students are homeschooled, they'll have a homeschool diploma. But the problem with these diplomas is that they vary widely from state to state, and it presents serious issues from the admissions side for an accredited college to look at that. So I'm encouraging strongly and building GED preparation into our classes across the board, and that's the baseline. We're also moving to having an AP program over the next 3 years, especially in the areas of history and English. And then we'll branch out from there. And that's another independent credential. It's a test that the College Board administers. The student sits down and takes where we don't administer it. It's very well respected, and if students get a certain score, they usually are awarded college credit. So those are the two main methods that we have for independent validation of what we're offering in the initiative, and hope that creates credibility from the point of view of college admissions. Yeah, thank you for that question, Gabrielle. Yes, Mother?
Perhaps I just missed something that I wasn't quite clear. Is the initiative intended, at least at this point, to be supplemental to regular public education and eventually become a full education? Is that what the plan is?
Thank you for asking that. So Mother asked, is the initiative intended to be supplemental, or is it the intention to make it a full school program? So at present, there are some students who use it in a supplemental fashion, and we don't reject those students. That's especially the case in our catechism classes, because in a lot of our parishes we don't have Sunday school or at all, perhaps, in a lot of mission parishes. But in terms of the academic classes, our intention is to move to a full school program over time, to be able to offer the complete set of classes from mathematics, science, history, English, and then of course the trivium classes. Because we think that it's unlikely that this trend won't continue. If you look at the trends in the news, there's a very high number of parents now turning to homeschooling for a variety of different reasons, but one of them is ideological. And I'll tell you, we homeschooled for our students, they are our students, our children the whole time. Homeschooling is very difficult and very daunting. And my wife and I are both trained, educated teachers. But it's very daunting. You're sitting there trying to do algebra, and the 2-year-old's doing whatever, and so forth. We have homeschooled because there wasn't anything else to do in our mind, given our situation. But we're trying to provide a reasonable, consistent alternative for a full-time school program for Orthodox Christians who would like it. So, yes, Mother, go ahead.
I just had a follow-up question. In the beginning, you mentioned that it could be nice to possibly enlist the help of SPOTS graduates, students coming out of SPOTS, to aid the initiative. But I was wondering, you mentioned this need for having teaching experience and being qualified enough to do that. And I wondered if you were looking to develop a way of training teachers.
Yes. So I'll answer the question. Oh wait, the question was, I said that you were about to tell me. Yeah, I felt it. The question was, I look for experience with the teachers, and we would like help from SPOTS students that graduate, but then how are we looking to create a program to train teachers? The short answer to that is yes, but we're going to have to figure out how to do it. Right now, I'm certainly qualified to. We've had one person go through a pilot, if you will, in the initiative, who was not a teacher, but I realized that he could be a really good teacher. And he worked for the initiative for a year and a half or so. He still works for the initiative, actually, but then he got a job at a classical school as well. So he works at a classical private school, and he works for the initiative part-time. So that has been done. That wasn't an advertised program. Effectively, I met him. I realized that he'd be a good teacher, and I recruited him. And then but to do it on a larger scale, we're going to have to think through how to do it. And some of it's a chicken or egg problem, because I'd have to stop teaching as many classes as I'm teaching in order to be able to do that. But yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, Gabrielle. Wow, that's a strong line.
Having audited our classes and, experienced what it's like to be a SPOT student in a certain way.
Yeah.
Would you say that the type of education that we're providing at SPOTS in any way prepares students differently for teaching in the classical style than a student who's studying at another institution?
Absolutely.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yes. So the question Gabrielle asked was, having audited the classes and seen what's being done at SPOTS, would I say that SPOTS is preparing students to teach in the fashion which we teach in the initiative, say, better than another college or university? That was the question, right?
Yeah, in a classical style.
In a classical style. And yes, absolutely. I can see it in the questions that the students ask, and I'm not trying to flatter any of you. But to answer the question, I can see it in the questions that the students ask, the comments that you make. And especially for those of you I knew before, I have a before and after picture. It's even more palpable to me. But the fact that both the ethos and the training, the classical training, is in the air here at SPOTS is palpable. And this is what's completely convinced me that we need to work to cooperate, because we obviously have a shared vision and a shared set of methods, and there's a high degree of complementarity then between our programs. Does that answer your question, Gabrielle?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
My name's Scott.
Nice to meet you, Scott.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you for So my question is, well, I would be curious to hear you speak more about the challenges of the online format. What is lost? Maybe what's lost that can't be mitigated, or it would be very difficult to be mitigated, and maybe also how the student is formed by the medium of the online education.
There's certainly things that are lost. Just give me a moment. I'll repeat the question in a moment. So Scott asked, given the online format, what's lost and possibly can't be mitigated in the process of educating students online? The easy answer to that is there's a certain loss of the personal aspect. You know, when you're in person, obviously there's aspects of human communication that come through more strongly online, or in person, I'm sorry. But that being said, it's not as bad as one may think, because now we've been doing this for 2 years, and I have children in the initiative that I've never met in person, but see 4 days a week in multiple classes, and talk about a wide variety of different types of topics, both natural and spiritual, secular and spiritual. And you do really, there is a distinct connection. I think, that being said, that probably one of the hardest things is facilitating the sort of communication with parents that you would have in a regular school. Because you have to get them on the phone, a lot of people, only text, and there's this whole process. Whereas in a regular school, you can make an appointment. They come down to the school and they talk to you, and I think that's actually that is a bigger struggle for us than the struggle with connecting with the students. But there are certainly deficits. Like when I teach, I'm usually in one place because I'm using an iPad for the whiteboard, so I'm kind of stuck in place. But I think, and the other thing I think is, obviously there are technical errors, right? Someone has a storm and their internet gets knocked out, right? And all of a sudden, or I do, and you can't have class, right? But on the flip side, there are no snow days, because as long as the internet doesn't go out, you don't have to get to school on a bus, right? So it evens out, I think. I think it does even out. The technology was not there 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you'd have to do everything in a written format, say on something like Moodle or Blackboard, and that's exceptionally daunting, right? Because now, instead of having oral communication, the student has to communicate entirely by writing, which becomes a problem unto itself, because if they're not very good at writing or they don't feel comfortable with it, which is most people in the world, then it's really, they hit an impasse pedagogically. But now, as the technology improves, it's so versatile that I think it is very functional. But I would like to create those hybrid programs as well. So does that answer your question, Scott?
Yeah. I suppose a little follow-up too.
Mm-hmm.
So I have two very young daughters, a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have to deal with this right now, which we're thankful for, but I don't want to send them to public school, and
Sure.
homeschooling is potentially an option. But
Mm-hmm.
I've looked into online classical education,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I'm hesitant to, have them sit in front of a screen
Yeah.
for their schooling. And I don't really have something specific in mind that I think that it would do to them.
Yeah.
But I have a suspicion that it's doing, sort of the medium is the message, that it's doing something.
Yeah, that is a valid concern. And I think it does need to be dealt with in a proactive way. Firstly, I have to repeat the question. Yeah. Sorry, I'm incorrigible. I'll do prostrations this evening. So Scott asked, the fact that in online education you would end up in front of the screen continually would appear, it would probably be somehow destructive or harmful to the student over time, and that is a concern. I mean, I think that it's very important to offset the fact that you're doing a virtual program, right? So I do this myself because it's an issue for me, right? I'm in front of the screen as well. So I actively, when I'm not teaching, I try to stay away from technology as much as possible. Not because it's intrinsically evil or anything, but just to try to offset that. I think another point that I think we do have to stress is, and this is why I really want to look at hybrid programs, we cannot be in loco parentis, as it were, in place of the parent like you have in a regular school. I can't come through the screen and protect the child from something, so the parent still really ought to be present, not right next to them, but in the vicinity, right? I think it's also important, especially really at any age, that a watchful eye is kept on what's going on with other pieces of software and what they're looking at. But again, see, and this touches on an issue that's been true and a problem that's existed in education for a long time. The first person that educates the child is the parent, right? And the first of the two parents is the mother, right? So, and I'm not saying that to get us out of a problem, but we're here to facilitate education in the skills, the methods, and the content, right? But the managing of the child, the parent has to be actively involved in that, right? And with respect to that, coming back to the hybrid program idea, that's one way to really mitigate it, because if the parents become active in developing hybrid programs, then the fact is that they won't end up in front of the screen quite as often. I'm not going to tell you that it's a perfect solution, because it's not. in an ideal world, we'd have school programs that were in person and there wouldn't be any electronics at all, maybe. I feel bad having said that after I looked around. The perfect is the enemy of the good, right? So we have to try to do what we can, and then put our trust in God prayerfully that won't damage our children, right? So, yeah, I've forgotten your name.
Nina.
Nina. Yes, Nina.
I think a good maybe follow-up to that too is taking a look at the use of technology in, let's say, the public school system.
Mm-hmm.
What would it look like for your child to be in the public school system? They probably would be spending a lot of time with a screen.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes.
And so I like the idea of making sure that you're careful to not use technology when you're not teaching.
Right.
To sort of offset that. But I think that in some of the public school systems or other education systems right now, screens are used a lot.
Yes,
And
most unfortunately.
And it's
Yeah. I know we should repeat that because that was a good point. So I'll try to. So what Nina said was, even though the initiative's online program presents the problem of being in front of a screen, in most public schools, or really all public schools, you're still going to have the same problem, and that's most certainly true. If you look at across the country, schools are now using various different kinds of software like Schoology and other sorts of things, and they give them Chromebooks, and they're constantly on the laptop. And it made me think of something that I do all the time, and I do it so often I forgot I do it. I really push with the students not to read their textbooks, not to read an electronic version of the textbook. I really push them to keep notebooks by hand. I actually, at least in my own classes, I insist that they don't take notes on the computer. So that the only thing that they're really experiencing that's electronic is the part where I'm speaking to them and the other students are speaking with them, or we're looking at something like a whiteboard or a video. And it made me think of it because I do it. It's like I do it so much that I forgot to mention it. I appreciate your asking that and saying that, oh yes, that's what your evidence, please.
In that your plate is so full with the St. John Initiative for the primary and secondary education, why have you taken on adults?
Thank you for asking that. So His Eminence asked, insofar as my plate is so full, why have we taken on adults? So that began during the shutdown last year. There was a perceived need. The adults felt spiritually famished. And everybody did, right, from being in church. So, and especially it was right during Great Lent, as we remember. And I thought, well, we're doing all these things. We're doing things with the students, with the children. We should find something to do with the adults. So I picked 3 homilies by Saint Ephrem the Syrian, and recorded them, and from the Father's set. It's in the public domain, and then I advertised it as a reading group, right? Those are classes, but they're meant to facilitate discussion and reading of spiritual texts. The underlying, but as we did it, what I thought about more and more is, if we're to convince the children that it's important to study, we have to create a habit in our eparchy where the adults are studying. So when the child sees their father or their mother come home from work and they're tired, and they have an obvious choice, they can sit down and, I don't know, look at something on the cell phone or the TV, or take out Saint Ephrem or whatever else we might be reading, and read even some of that to participate in a discussion group. It says, by way of example, that this is important, right? And that's crucial, because I think for far too long in our culture, we've said the reason you pursue education is to get a piece of paper so you can make money. And obviously that's part of why we seek education, but it's not the only reason. Education is a good unto itself. So if we're going to convey that, we have to get the adults doing it, and that's the idea. Yeah. Thank you, Your Eminence. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Mother. Excuse me.
If you were hoping eventually to also have a physical, like a physical school?
Yes. Yes.
Or if you were intending to try to keep it sort of spread out and online?
Yes. So the question is, are we intending to have a physical school for the initiative? The answer to that question is yes. So our first pilot hybrid program is actually in Hillsdale, comprised of a few families at the moment. We're hoping, with God's help, to acquire a facility that will have classrooms and offices and a chapel, and then be able to turn that hybrid program into a full school. Not just a hybrid program, but an actual school, at which time I'm going to have to hire somebody else to run the online portion because I'm not going to be able to do all of that. But yes, we are seeking, with God's help, to do that over time. Yeah. I want to say something. I'll take the question, but I want to say it before I forget. More than anything else, I'd like active conversation with the students. We've already established this with the professors here at Spots. I think it's, I mentioned the other night that John Henry Newman, in The Idea of a University, says that if he was giving the choice to get rid of the classrooms or get rid of the cafeteria, he would get rid of the classrooms, because in the cafeteria you can still have all this conversation, right? And I think it's crucial that we converse on these topics in a serious way and really spend time with it and create a culture of learning, in our eparchy, and so that we can collaborate effectively. And you should understand, along with that, I'm very open to constructive criticism, other ideas. So feel free to have back and forth with me. I welcome it. You can call me up. I don't have a cell phone. You'll have to call me on a regular phone. You can call me up, and I really would like that a lot. Yes, Gabrielle.
That was a good intro into my question,
Okay.
which is if people want to discuss the initiative further,
Mhm.
and they want to learn more about it, if they want to offer their service through labor or their support financially, who is the right person to contact, and how should they contact them?
Right. I probably should have brought our phone number with us, but we'll put that in the description, perhaps.
Yes.
So you can reach us by email also, and our phone number, which will be in the description on the video. You should contact me or my presbytera. At this moment, field a lot of this sort of discussion, but that is something we're trying to change. But so contact us so we can change it. That's the short answer. Please contact me or my presbytera at the information that will be in the description box. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Father.
Will there be a place in the comments section of this when it goes onto YouTube or whatever format? People can ask questions and that you'll see and you can respond in that way.
I'd have to say that's not probably my style. It's going to be on the Spots channel anyway, which I wouldn't have access to. If Gabrielle thinks it probably should be my style, I'd consider it. But I think that it's better to call me or email me and set up a time to talk. I think there's a lot of room for miscommunication in those kinds of situations, so I try to avoid them. Yeah. Thank you. I forgot to repeat that question. I'm sorry. I did, didn't I? Sorry. Okay. Thanks. Well, if there's not any other questions, I want to thank all of you for having me speak. I hope that this was useful to you, and I pray that through the intercessions of St. Photius the Great and St. John of Damascus, that God will bless us with good collaboration and community between our two programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.